My name is Joanna Pierce. I'm 23, and the stupidest thing I ever did was trust my family with my future. I realized it the night my sister walked into the bathroom with my passport, flipped open the toilet lid, and dropped it in. I heard the splash first. By the time I pushed the door open, the water was cloudy, ink bleeding out of the pages. My passport bobbed once, then folded in on itself and sank. That little booklet was my ticket to Paris, my graduation gift to myself after years of doing everything right. In a few seconds, it turned into a ruined clump of paper swirling in dirty water. From the living room, laughter broke out. It wasn't nervous or shocked. It was the kind people use when they think they've won. My parents were on the couch, my nephew was bouncing on the rug, and my sister was leaning back like she'd just pulled off a clever trick. She didn't even pretend it was an accident. She just watched my face, waiting for it to crack. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood there, staring at the toilet, feeling every plan I had for the next few weeks dissolve and slide away with the ink. My flight and hotel, my one chance to breathe after years of being the reliable one in this house, gone. And everyone in that room knew exactly what they had decided. I was not going to Paris. I was staying home. I was going to watch the kid. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. In that house by the harbor, nothing about the way we lived had happened overnight. It had been built slowly, year after year, on a quiet assumption that I would always bend first. My older sister, Bridget Pierce, had her son young and moved back into our parents' narrow row house in Baltimore while she figured herself out. On paper, it sounded temporary. She just needed a place to land, a safety net. By the time I started college, that temporary had hardened into something else. Everyone expected Bridget to focus on getting her life together, and they also expected me to fill in the gaps she left behind. My father, Kenneth, worked irregular shifts down by the port. My mother, Phyllis, picked up hours wherever she could, mostly at a small grocery store just off the main road. The running joke in our family was that nobody knew when anyone would be home. But it was never really a mystery who would be there if Bridget needed to drop her son off at the last minute. Somehow, my schedule was always the one that could be rearranged. When Henry was a toddler, people liked to say I was a natural. They meant it as a compliment, but it landed like a warning. If he needed feeding, I handled it. If he woke up at 3 a.m, I padded down the narrow hallway and rocked him until dawn, while Bridget slept through the noise on the other side of a thin wall. I learned how to type essays on my laptop at the kitchen table with one arm, while the other kept a squirming child from toppling out of his chair. At first, I told myself it was fine. I was living at home, saving money, and this was what family did. Every time Bridget pushed one more responsibility my way, there was a story to go with it. Her boss had called, a shift had changed, there was a class she could not miss, or a friend who needed her. There was always a reason, always something that made my plans sound less important than hers. In college, classmates talked about study groups and weekend trips. My version of a wild night was trying to memorize case studies while Henry dumped toy trucks across the living room carpet. If I complained, my parents reminded me that I was good with him, that he listened to me, that not everyone had someone they could rely on the way Bridget had me. It sounded like praise, but it pinned me down. The house itself made everything worse. 3 adults and a growing child squeezed into a narrow space meant there was no corner that fully belonged to me. My room faced the back alley, and sound from the port rolled in every evening, but inside the louder noise came from the living room. Cartoons, tantrums, the constant shuffle of Bridget's routines swallowed whatever quiet I managed to carve out. Whenever I tried to set a boundary, it turned into an argument I could not win. If I said I had a paper due, I was reminded that I was young and resilient. If I mentioned needing sleep before an exam, I was told that real adults powered through fatigue. If I hinted that Henry was not my child, the room went cold and someone would ask whether I thought I was too good for this family now that I was earning a degree. Over time, it blurred together. I stopped keeping track of how many evenings I traded away, how many weekends I spent shuttling Henry to the park instead of seeing friends. I was present for his first full sentences, his first scraped knee, his first day at preschool, all while trying to keep my own future from shrinking to the size of our living room. By the time graduation came into view, it felt less like a milestone and more like the only exit I had left. By the time graduation season crept up on me, my world felt split between the harbor and the campus. During the day, I sat in lecture halls, listening to people talk about careers and next steps. At night, I went back to the narrow row house and tried to picture a future that did not end in that living room. The idea of Paris started as a thought I barely let myself touch. It came while I was scrolling through photos classmates posted from trips abroad, faces under skylines I had only seen in textbooks. I told myself it was unrealistic, that people like me did not just fly overseas, but the thought waited every time I stared at the blank space after the graduation ceremony on my calendar. What made it feel possible was the envelope from my grandmother, the one she insisted I open over video call because she wanted to see my face. Inside was a check large enough that I had to sit down. She wrote that she had never gone anywhere outside the East Coast, and that I should use the money to see something bigger than our corner of the world. I spent an evening running numbers and comparing flights, hunting down a guest house in Paris. I kept everything on my own laptop and my own email, not out of secrecy, but because I was used to handling my business in whatever small space I could claim as mine. When I confirmed the round-trip ticket, the confirmation ping felt louder than the cargo horns drifting in through my bedroom window. There it was, a departure date, a return date, and my name in the booking details. I had something ahead of me that did not belong to my sister. I waited a few days before saying anything at home. A family dinner seemed like the right place. My father was at the table instead of at work. My mother had time to cook a meal instead of reheating something, and my sister was sitting down instead of rushing back out the door. The table was crowded with plates, and the smell of the harbor clung to my father's jacket. I chose a moment when everyone had food on their plates and the room was as calm as it ever got. I mentioned that my classes were almost over, that my graduation date was set, and that I had used my gift money to book a trip to Paris as a way to mark the end of school. I did not go into a long explanation. I laid it down in the middle of the meal like one more dish. The reaction landed unevenly. My mother smiled first, a quick expression that looked more polite than excited, and asked a few questions about the flight and where I would be staying. My father nodded once, the way he did when he heard news he was not sure how to process but did not want to dismiss. Across the table, Bridget went very still. The pause between one forkful and the next stretched just long enough for me to feel it in the air. She started asking about dates, not out of curiosity, but in a way that sounded like she was checking for a conflict on a calendar I had never agreed to share. The more I clarified the timing of my trip, the tighter her jaw became. There was no confusion in her eyes, only calculation, like she was working out how my leaving would punch a hole through the routine she had built on my availability. By the end of the meal, my plate was empty and the announcement was no longer just mine. It had been weighed and quietly filed in everyone's mind against their own needs. I stacked dishes in the sink while voices carried from the living room, and my decision settled between the clink of plates and the distant sound of ships moving out on the water. The night before my flight slipped in quietly. I had checked in, printed my confirmation, and slid it into the folder with my documents. My suitcase waited at the foot of my bed, zipped and ready. For the first time in a long time, tomorrow did not look like every other day. My father left for a late shift by the docks, shrugging into his jacket and calling a quick goodbye. My mother settled on the couch with a stack of envelopes. A cartoon jingle played somewhere for Henry. Bridget moved between the kitchen and the living room, checking her phone, opening and shutting cabinets with restless hands. No one asked about my flight. No one said the word Paris. I remembered a few small items I still needed and walked to the corner store. Down the block, past the narrow brick houses and the cars jammed tight along the curb, the air off the harbor felt damp and cold. Under the harsh store lights, I grabbed travel-sized toiletries and a new charger, paid in cash, and stepped back into the street. The smell of the water pushed at my back as I headed home. When I turned onto our street again, the sky over the port was dark, broken by clusters of distant lights. From the sidewalk, our house looked exactly the same, a dull glow pressed against thin curtains. Nothing about it suggested anything had changed in the short time I was gone. I let myself in and set the plastic bag on the kitchen counter. The television murmured from the living room. I walked down the hallway to my room. The suitcase sat where I had left it. The folder with my papers rested on top of my backpack. I laid my hand on it, felt the familiar solid weight, and told myself the knot in my chest was only nerves about flying. As I stepped back into the hall, I noticed the bathroom door pulled almost shut, a strip of light cutting across the floorboards. A faint sound came from inside, a low, uneven gurgle that did not match a shower or a dripping tap. On any other night, I might have ignored it. I nudged the door open. The cramped bathroom looked the same as always. Chipped sink, old tile, mirror clouded at the edges. The toilet lid stood up. The water inside was cloudy, tinged with a dull wash of color. Just beneath the surface, something dark and rectangular was beginning to curl inward. My passport is a small navy booklet, or it was. In the bowl, water had already soaked through the cover. The pages were swelling and pulling away from each other, ink bleeding in faint ribbons that blurred stamps and lines of text. It sat in the center of the water. There were no splashes on the rim, no drops on the floor, no trace of a clumsy slip. Out in the living room, the television volume ticked up. A laugh track rolled over my mother's softer laugh. Henry's feet thudded across the rug. A burst of amusement drifted down the hallway, bright and careless. No one called my name. No one warned me that anything might be wrong. I did not reach into the water. Even if I dried those pages until morning, no agent at the airport was going to look at that warped booklet and wave me onto a plane. Whoever had done this had chosen the exact moment when fixing it in time would be impossible. They had not just ruined paper. They had cut straight through the only plan I had made for myself in years. Heat rose in my face, but I stayed where I was. Storming into the living room would not change what I had just seen. The people laughing on the other side of that wall already knew what they had done. The only thing left for me to decide was how I would answer it. Morning settled over the neighborhood in a gray film. I woke up with the heaviness of someone who had gone to sleep without solving anything and opened the bathroom door just long enough to see that everything looked untouched. In the kitchen, I took a plastic freezer bag, fished the passport out with rubber gloves, and sealed it inside. The cover sagged and the pages had swollen into a warped block, ink soaked through where stamps and numbers used to be. I slid the bag into my backpack and closed the zipper. I was not saving it. I was keeping proof. My mother moved through her usual motions, making coffee and stacking bread beside the toaster. My sister scrolled through her phone at the table while Henry pushed a toy truck in slow circles on the floor. No one mentioned my trip. The silence around it felt deliberate. I poured myself coffee, forced down a few sips, and knew that if I stayed there, I would end up swallowing whatever story everyone else decided to tell. I told my mother I needed to step out to run an errand. She nodded without looking up. Outside, trucks rumbled toward the docks and workers clustered at the crosswalks. I walked to the small coffee shop a few blocks away, took a table in the corner, set my bag on the chair beside me, and pulled out my phone. There was one person I trusted enough to involve. I sent a short message to my friend Samir Nasser and asked if he had a few minutes. He worked as a paralegal at a firm downtown and had a calm, methodical way of untangling other people's disasters. When he replied that he was between tasks, I called and laid everything out in order. The trip, where I had stored the passport, the amused voices from the living room, the cloudy water in the toilet. Samir listened without interrupting. When I ran out of words, he started asking his own. Where exactly had I kept the passport? Who could enter my room? How tall was Henry? How long had I been gone? Had I ever seen my nephew go through my things? The more details I gave, the more the timeline pulled away from anything that felt accidental. I told him that the passport had been in a folder with my boarding pass and reservations, tucked into the zipped compartment of my carry-on. The carry-on sat against the wall at the foot of my bed. The door was mostly closed when I left. Henry was not allowed to rummage through my belongings, and even if he had tried, he would have needed to drag the suitcase out, unzip it, open the folder, and then carry the booklet all the way to the bathroom without leaving a mark on the floor or splashes on the seat. Samir said that true accidents rarely stayed that neat. A small child knocking something into a toilet usually left footprints, wet tissue, a loud reaction from whoever found the mess. What I had described was damage aimed at one object and nothing else. By the time the call ended, my hands had stopped shaking. I walked back home with the bagged passport in my backpack, and Samir's questions circling in my head. None of the answers made space for bad luck. Inside the house, the day had moved forward without me. The television murmured from the living room. My mother had gone to work. My sister stood at the sink rinsing a cup while Henry sat near the hallway with his truck, humming to himself. He glanced up when I stepped inside. Something in his expression shifted. An eager look of a child holding a secret. I watched his eyes move from me to his mother and back again, and a small part of me braced for the one stray comment that would turn suspicion into certainty. A moment later, the house gave me the answer I had been waiting for. Henry rolled his toy truck toward me, looked up, and said his mom had told him not to talk about the book she put in the bathroom water, the one with my face inside. By the time the truck reached my shoe, he was already pushing it in another direction. At the sink, my sister went rigid. The cup in her hand stopped just under the running tap. Her shoulders tightened in a way that had nothing to do with confusion. I did not ask Henry to say more. I walked down the hallway, stepped into my room, and shut the door. My backpack waited by the bed. Inside it, the passport sat in its plastic bag, swollen and uneven. I set it on my lap and stared at it until the noise from the living room blurred together. Samir's questions from that morning returned in order. Where did you keep it? Who could reach it? What would an accident really look like? I pictured my closed door, the zipped suitcase, the folder opened, one booklet removed, nothing else disturbed. I pictured clear bathroom tile and clean water before a single object changed it. I added Henry's small voice, repeating that his mother had told him not to talk. The conclusion felt cold and simple. Someone had decided my trip was optional. They had made that choice inside my space, with my documents, and brought a 5-year-old into the secret. There was no version of that I could fold into normal family tension and then forget. I pulled a small overnight bag from the closet and packed enough clothes for a few days. I slid the folder with my travel papers inside, slipped the bagged passport on top, and zipped it shut. The larger suitcase for Paris stayed by the bed like an empty promise. When my father came back from the docks and my mother arrived from the store, I asked them to sit at the kitchen table. I set the sealed bag in the middle of the worn surface and told them what had happened, from the booking to the bathroom to the sentence Henry had dropped in the hallway. I said I knew the flight could not be saved. I was not asking for a replacement trip. What I wanted was specific and limited: the cost of an expedited passport, the airline's change fee, and the amount the guest house in Paris would charge to move my reservation. I slid a sheet of paper toward them with each total written out. I called it what it was: compensation for damage that had not been caused by chance. My mother looked at the warped booklet inside the bag. My father's jaw tightened. Across from them, my sister leaned back in her chair with her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the far wall. She said I was overreacting, that Henry mixed things up, that the passport had already looked old. Every excuse bent away from the one fact that mattered, that my plans had been taken apart on purpose. Before my father spoke, Henry wandered in, drawn by the sight of everyone at the table. He saw the bag and pointed at it. He said that was the book his mom had held over the toilet, the one she told him to keep quiet so I would have to stay. The room dropped into silence. My mother dropped her gaze. My father straightened in his chair. My sister's face drained of color. I did not soften what came next. I told them I would be staying with a friend and that I expected the money for those costs within a short time. After that, there would be no more last-minute requests, no more unpaid childcare. I laid the words down as a line between the life I had been living and the one I was choosing instead. In the days that followed, I treated my decision as final. After years of bending around everyone else, I refused to fold again. I slept on a pull-out couch in a friend's apartment while I waited for an appointment at the passport agency. It was not comfortable, but no one called from another room asking for help, and every hour of the day finally felt like it belonged to me. With Samir's help, I wrote a brief letter to my parents. We listed the cost of an expedited passport, the airline change fee, and the money the guest house would keep, and stated that those costs existed because my documents had been damaged on purpose. At the bottom, we added one line saying that if the amounts were not covered, I would consider small claims court. It did not need extra emotion. It simply placed what had happened beside responsibility instead of excuses. The money came in slowly. My father sent enough to cover the new passport and part of the flight. My mother filled in the rest over the next week. My sister sent nothing. Each transfer that landed in my account underlined the same point. However they chose to tell the story inside that house, they knew this had not been an accident. While the payments arrived, I finished my finals and organized my move. 2 friends showed up with an empty trunk, and we carried my boxes down the narrow stairs without small talk. My mother stood at the door. My father stayed near the kitchen. My sister lingered behind them. No one stepped forward with an apology that named what she had done, or asked me to stay in a way that respected the line I had drawn. I put my key on the counter and walked out. I did not promise to come back for dinners or to watch Henry on weekends. Leaving hurt, but it was a clean pain, the kind that comes from pulling something sharp out of your skin instead of leaving it buried. The new passport arrived a few weeks later, stiff and untouched. I did not copy the trip I had lost. I picked new dates, chose a small place to stay, and booked 1 ticket in my name. There were no group selfies at the gate and no shared itinerary waiting on my phone. Boarding that plane alone did not feel like a punishment. It felt accurate. For once, my plans belonged entirely to me. Back in Baltimore, the gaps I had been filling stayed empty. Without free childcare, my sister started turning down shifts or paying for help she had never planned to hire. My parents had to arrange their days without assuming I would cover whatever they could not. I did not cut them off completely, but I answered only the calls that sounded like respect. Guilt and pressure went to voicemail and stayed there. Sometimes doubt still tried to creep in. I wondered if I had been too harsh, if family meant absorbing whatever they did in the name of love. When that happened, I brought back one image only: my passport sinking into toilet water while laughter drifted down the hallway, and my nephew repeating the secret he had been told to keep. Remembering that made the doubt go quiet again. If this story offers anything, I hope it gives you permission to treat your future as something worth guarding. Being related to someone does not give them the right to sabotage your life and call it care. Boundaries do not make you cruel. They are how you stop generous from turning into used. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If any part of this felt close to home, take a moment to think about where your own line needs to be and what might change if you finally drew it. And if you feel like sharing how it lands with you, I am here, reading on the other side of the screen.